I never thought I'd be cast out like garbage by my own daughter. Even now, I can barely believe it, like some twisted dream I keep hoping to wake up from. When my husband, David, died last year after a brutal fight with pancreatic cancer, I thought the worst pain of my life had already come and gone. I was wrong. Because nothing could have prepared me for what Rachel did. After his funeral, I was adrift, walking around our house like a ghost, sleeping in a bed that felt twice as big and 10 times as cold. Every corner whispered his name. The silence was unbearable. Rachel said I shouldn't stay there alone. "Come stay with us, Mom. Just for a little while," she said. I believed her. I trusted her. I sold the house David and I built with our bare hands. I packed up decades of memories and climbed into the back seat of her husband Travis's truck. He didn't even get out to help me load the bags. That should have been my first sign. From the start, Travis looked at me like I was an unpaid debt, a problem to be tolerated. I tried to stay out of the way, kept to my room in the back, cooked dinner, did laundry, even left post-it notes with dinner instructions when they worked late. But his eyes, those cold, narrow eyes, watched me like I was an insect crawling across his countertop. He never raised his voice, not then. He didn't have to. It was in the way he changed the TV channel while I was mid-show, or how he'd roll his eyes when I asked if they needed anything from the store. Once, I heard him mutter under his breath as he passed me in the hallway, "Freeloader!" I froze. My ears burned. My hands were shaking. I told myself I must have misheard. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. I wanted to believe Rachel didn't know, that she couldn't see what he was doing. But she did. She saw everything and said nothing. When I gently brought it up, she brushed it off. "He's just tired, Mom. Work is stressful." As if stress gave him the right to treat me like a stain on their carpet. But the night it happened, the night everything fell apart, wasn't loud. It wasn't a screaming match or a dramatic fight. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I had made dinner, chicken and herb pot pie, Travis's favorite, though he never thanked me for anything. Rachel sat across the table, eyes glued to her phone, barely acknowledging me. Then Travis looked up from his beer and said, "You know, maybe it's time we stop pretending this is temporary. We're not a charity." I blinked. My fork clattered against the plate. What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He smirked. "I mean, how long is this supposed to go on? You're not working. You're not contributing. We've got bills. We didn't sign up for extra mouths to feed." I looked at Rachel, pleaded with my eyes, begged for a single word, a line of defense, anything. She didn't even look at me. She just mumbled, "Maybe it's best if you find something more stable, for everyone's sake." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up, walked to the room they gave me, packed my life into 2 suitcases. They didn't stop me. They didn't ask if I had anywhere to go. Travis turned the TV back on. Rachel kept scrolling. I walked out into the cold night, the wind clawing at my face, my chest hollow and burning. I sat on the curb for over an hour, phone dead, heartbroken, wondering what I had done to deserve being erased by the one person I thought would never forget me. That night, staring up at the cracked ceiling of a $36 motel room, I realized something that made me nauseous. I was completely, utterly alone. I didn't cry when I walked away from Rachel's apartment building. My hands were too numb from the cold, my chest too hollow to make space for tears. The shock hadn't worn off yet. It just sat inside me, still and silent, like a fist pressed to my throat. I checked into the cheapest motel I could find on the outskirts of town. $36 a night. No refunds, no warmth. The walls were the color of yellowed paper, the kind you find in an attic after decades of dust and silence. The air smelled faintly of bleach and old smoke, the kind that clings to everything long after the fire's gone out. I sat on the edge of the stiff bed, my suitcases beside me like two silent witnesses to my humiliation, and stared at the floor until night fell and I couldn't see my reflection in the dusty mirror anymore. That's when the grief crawled out of me. Not loud, just trembling. The kind of grief you don't sob through, you endure it, like an infection. The next morning, I told myself I would find a job, get back on my feet. I held on to that thought like it was a rope in a flood. I walked to the nearby gas station, used the grimy public phone, and started calling places: grocery stores, diners, front desks, even housekeeping gigs. "We'll get back to you," they said. "You're overqualified." Which I knew was code for too old, too sad, too broken. I began skipping meals to save money, alternating between stale vending machine crackers and whatever microwavable soup I could get for under $1. Every clink of coins into the machine felt like losing another piece of myself. I kept trying to text Rachel. Small things at first. Just wanted to check in. Hope you're doing okay. Then, thinking of you. I love you. Then just a single heart emoji. Nothing came back. Not even a read receipt. At night, the silence was unbearable. I'd lie in bed staring at the water-stained ceiling while trucks roared past the highway outside, their headlights flashing across the room like ghosts. The hum of the vending machine outside my door became the only consistent sound in my life. Sometimes I'd wake up in the dark, heart pounding, convinced I heard David calling my name. But it was always just the wind pushing against the warped window. I began to dread the sunrise. It meant another day of pretending I wasn't breaking. I couldn't look people in the eye anymore. I'd go out to walk the block just to feel something real, but every time I passed a family or a couple laughing, I'd feel like I was dissolving, disappearing one cell at a time. I used to be a mother, a wife, someone who made birthday cakes and sewed Halloween costumes. Now, I was just a forgotten woman in a motel room that smelled like despair. By the third week, I stopped checking my phone. I couldn't bear the silence it held. The fear began to set in like a fever. What if I never got a job? What if I couldn't afford the room next week? What if I got sick and no one found me? There were moments I considered walking into traffic. Not because I wanted to die, but because I didn't know how to live like this. I was angry. Angry at Rachel for letting him do this. Angry at myself for believing her. Angry at the world for chewing up women like me and spitting us out when we're no longer useful. But mostly, I was terrified. Terrified that this was it. That I would die in that motel room and no one would even notice until the smell drifted into the hallway. I was invisible, unwanted, and I didn't know how to become anything else. It happened on a night like every other. Cold, stale, quiet enough that the hum of the vending machine outside the motel room felt like the only thing keeping me tethered to the earth. I was sorting through the last box I hadn't touched since I left Rachel's. It sat under the small motel desk, dusty and dented, like a coffin for the remnants of the life I used to have. Inside were old photographs, me and David on our wedding day, Rachel in pigtails with frosting on her nose, a faded Christmas card from a neighbor I couldn't even remember anymore. I didn't know what I was looking for. Maybe some proof that I had once mattered to someone, that I hadn't imagined the love I gave or the family I lost. At the very bottom, wrapped in a yellowing plastic bag, was a small, leather-bound book. I recognized it immediately. My mother's diary. I don't know why I hadn't burned it years ago. I never remembered her as the sentimental type. She was quiet, hard-working, distant in ways I didn't understand until I became a mother myself. I flipped it open with a sigh, expecting mundane entries, complaints about grocery prices, recipes, church schedules. But the further I read, the colder my blood ran. One entry, dated June 1983, stopped me cold. He came again today. He said he wished things were different, that he wished I could be his wife. But he has a name to protect, a family, a business. Lenora must never know. I just pray that one day she understands how much I loved her, even if she was born of mistake and desire. I froze. My hands trembled violently. I read the passage again, then again, like maybe I'd misunderstood it. I wanted to believe I had. I wanted to believe I was reading fiction. But I wasn't. My mother was talking about my father, a man I'd never known. And she wasn't describing a husband. She was describing a secret, a betrayal buried in silence. I kept turning pages, each entry more shocking than the last. Meetings in hotels, envelopes of money left under floorboards, desperation bleeding from her handwriting like an open wound. She never named him in full, just initials, CRM. But then, tucked into an entry dated February 1985, she wrote something that made my lungs stop working. He said he made arrangements, that if anything happened to him, something would reach Lenora, a part of what he built, through his lawyer, Mr. Ellison. Said he'd handle everything. I sat back, stunned, the diary slipping from my fingers onto the scratchy motel carpet. I felt sick, betrayed not just by Rachel, but by the very roots of my life. Who was this man? Why had no one ever told me? Why had my mother died with this truth buried deep in her chest, like a shameful scar? I didn't sleep that night. Fear twisted itself around my ribs like barbed wire. What if it was a lie? What if chasing this ghost only brought more disappointment? But I had nothing left to lose. Not my home, not my family, not even my dignity. Those were already gone. The next morning, I found the motel's shared computer kiosk and typed in the name, Samuel Ellison, attorney. There he was, still listed under a private firm in Houston. My hands were shaking too much to call, so I did the only thing I could. I wrote a letter. A real one, with ink that smeared when my tears hit the page. I told him everything, my name, my mother's, the diary. I asked for a moment of his time. I begged. Then I mailed it, dropped it into the box with fingers that felt like they belonged to someone else. 2 weeks passed. Silence. Each day, I told myself it was over, that he wouldn't respond, that I'd made it all up, that I was crazy. Then, on a gray Tuesday afternoon, my phone rang. A number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer. But I did. And when the voice on the other end said, "Lenora? I've been waiting for this call for a very long time." Something inside me cracked. Not just from grief or fear, but from the weight of a truth that had been buried in dust for decades, and was now rising, whether I was ready or not. The Greyhound to Houston felt like a funeral procession. Every bump in the road echoed in my spine. Every second of silence stretched too long, like a heartbeat waiting to stop. I clutched my mother's diary in my lap like it was a lifeline, even though every word in it had unstitched the foundation of everything I thought I knew about my life. I kept asking myself, what was I doing? Chasing the ghost of a man who'd loved my mother in secret but never acknowledged me? I was terrified, not just of being disappointed, but of being nothing. What if I walked into that law office and he didn't know me? Or worse, what if he did? What would that say about me? About her? About the life I had lived unknowingly in the shadows of someone else's shame? Samuel Ellison's office was tucked inside a quiet, wood-paneled building that smelled like time had paused there decades ago. Books lined the walls, titles I couldn't focus on. My breath caught the moment he opened the door. An older man, late 70s maybe, thin but upright, eyes sharp with memory. "Lenora," he said. His voice cracked like an old record. "You look just like her." My knees almost buckled. We didn't exchange pleasantries. He didn't offer coffee or small talk. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a sealed envelope, yellowed at the edges, delicate as ash. "He wrote this for you, told me to wait. Said one day you might come." My fingers trembled as I took it. The name on the front, Lenora May Thomas, in clean, deliberate ink, written by a man I'd never met but whose blood ran through my veins. The first line gutted me. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm sorry for everything. He admitted it all. How he'd loved my mother, how he'd never had the courage to leave his wife, how he'd watched from afar as I grew up fatherless. I should have claimed you, but I was a coward with a name to protect. I let fear make me small, and that fear took your place in my life. I sobbed, silently, my whole body shaking as the words burrowed into my bones. I felt grief, not for his death, but for the life I could have had, for the truth I had been denied. For every moment I'd spent as a daughter begging for love, not knowing my own father had been just a signature away. He said he left something for me, not part of his estate, but something separate, hidden. He called it a quiet atonement. Mr. Ellison slid a second envelope across the table. Inside, account numbers, legal documents, ownership papers, a small investment portfolio, bank assets, deeds, including one property, an apartment complex in Austin. The blood drained from my face. The apartment. The same one Rachel and Travis lived in. The one they had kicked me out of like I was nothing more than a burden they were finally done carrying. I sat there frozen, hands shaking, unable to speak. The building they ruled like royalty. They didn't just live there. I owned it. It was mine. Legally, quietly, ironically. It didn't feel like triumph. It felt like standing at the center of a collapsed house, wreckage all around, silence deafening. I should have felt powerful, vindicated. Instead, I felt gutted, because all of it, the inheritance, the truth, the key to that building, came at a cost I never agreed to pay. My identity, my sense of self, my belief in love and safety. I didn't feel rich. I felt robbed. That night, I returned to my motel and sat on the edge of the bed, with the envelope in my lap and the letter pressed to my chest. I whispered into the stale air. Why now? There was no answer. Just the hum of the vending machine and the choking weight of a secret finally unearthed. Too late to heal what had already been broken. When the papers were finalized and the building was legally mine, I didn't feel victorious. I felt like a stranger in my own skin, like I was inhabiting a life meant for someone braver, someone colder. I had the keys to the kingdom now, but it wasn't a castle. It was the same place that had watched me walk out carrying nothing but 2 suitcases and a silence so loud it still echoed in my bones. Rachel and Travis had no idea. They were still living there, brushing their teeth and watching their shows and going about their days as if they hadn't tossed me out like a broken appliance. And now, every time they flipped a light switch or locked their front door, they were doing it under my roof. But there was no joy in the irony, just a sick, gnawing emptiness. I didn't want revenge, at least not the dramatic kind. I wanted consequence, and I wanted to deliver it not with screams or confrontations, but with silence and signatures. I set up an LLC through Mr. Ellison, masked the ownership under a trust. Lenora May Thomas disappeared from the building's paperwork, replaced by a faceless entity named LMT Holdings. I watched from a distance, quietly, carefully, as the management company sent out the first wave of lease reassessments. The notice to Rachel and Travis was cold, formal. Their rent would increase by 230%, reflecting the true market value of their unit, plus accumulated late fees and assessments for past repairs. Nothing illegal, nothing personal. Just numbers, ruthless, impartial numbers. I imagined Travis's face when he opened the envelope. I could practically hear his rage from miles away, the way he probably shouted and paced and called it robbery. The man who once muttered freeloader under his breath now owed me more than he could afford. It should have felt good, but all it did was deepen the ache. Because as satisfying as it might have been to watch them squirm, I still remembered the look on Rachel's face that night. the one she didn't show me. The way she wouldn't meet my eyes when I begged her, silently, for even a sliver of mercy. That night, I lost more than a home. I lost my daughter. And now, she lived in my building, and I lived in her shadow. The fear didn't go away. It changed shape. I stayed anonymous, but I watched everything, through reports, inspection photos, maintenance logs. When complaints started trickling in, about Travis berating the staff, about Rachel crying in the laundry room at midnight, I felt my stomach twist. Not with pity, with dread. This man wasn't just cruel, he was unraveling, and I had built the cage he was now thrashing against. What if he found out it was me? What if he traced it back and turned all that venom back toward me? The thought kept me up at night, made me double-check locks, avoid phone calls, sleep with the diary pressed against my chest like armor. Still, I kept going. Slowly, methodically. I authorized repairs on the building. Nothing flashy, just functional. Fixed leaky pipes, replaced the elevator bulbs, cleaned the exterior. All the things Travis used to complain the landlord never did. Now they were being done on my terms, with his money. My management company sent out friendly memos and repair schedules. Professional, distant. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to be seen. I just needed them to feel the weight of the silence they once weaponized against me. Some nights, I drove past the building just to see it. I never got out. I never lingered. I'd sit in my car a block away and stare at the windows, counting the shadows. Wondering if Rachel ever thought of me. Wondering if she even missed me. And then, I'd remind myself, missing someone doesn't mean you deserve them. And I was no longer the woman they discarded. I was the landlord, the invisible hand they didn't even know was watching. It started with the reports, small things at first. The property manager forwarded me a tenant complaint, loud arguing, objects breaking, late-night shouting coming from Unit 2B, Rachel and Travis's apartment. I read the email 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I couldn't believe I was reading about her. About my daughter. My baby girl, whose hair I used to braid before school, who once cried when she lost a stuffed bear in the grocery store. Now she was the woman behind a closed door, trapped in a war zone of her own making. I didn't know whether to feel vindicated or crushed. All I knew was that every word on that report felt like a needle under my skin. And still, I did nothing. I stayed silent. The silence I once feared had become my shield, my punishment, my prison. Soon, more complaints rolled in. Neighbors said Travis had become unhinged, yelling at the maintenance staff, banging on the office door after hours, leaving profanity-laced notes in the lobby. Rachel, they said, looked thinner, worn out, eyes sunken, shoulders hunched. One tenant even reported seeing her crying on the back steps, head in her hands, as if the very weight of her life was caving in. I stared at that sentence for so long, the words blurred. My heart throbbed with something ugly, grief and guilt and a fury I didn't know how to name. She had chosen him over me, and now he was choosing destruction over her. And still, I ached for her. God help me, I still did. One night, the property manager sent photos after an inspection. Mold blooming under the bathroom sink, cracked tiles in the kitchen, trash piled in corners. The place was deteriorating from the inside out, just like their marriage. And I couldn't shake the question gnawing at me. How much longer could she survive this? But then I'd remember the night she stood by him, let him tell me to leave, and I'd choke on my sympathy. My mind would scream, she let this happen. But my heart would whisper, she's still your daughter. Then came the envelope. No return address. Inside was a note scrawled in angry, erratic handwriting I recognized instantly. I know what you're doing. You think you're clever, but you don't scare me. I'll find out who you are. And when I do, you'll regret it. No signature, but it didn't need one. It reeked of Travis. His entitlement, his rage, his arrogance wrapped in paranoia. My hands trembled as I held the paper. Not out of fear, out of disgust. The same man who had looked me in the eye and stripped me of my dignity was now grasping at shadows, unraveling because he couldn't find a face to blame. But still, a deep primal anxiety crawled up my spine. I doubled security, installed cameras, made sure staff knew to report everything. I didn't feel safe. I felt hunted, like I had set a trap and now had to pray I didn't get caught in it myself. Rachel never called. Not once. But I heard she was walking to work now. Their car was gone. One of the tenants said their power had been cut for 2 days. No lights, no heat. I pictured her wrapped in blankets in the dark, sitting next to a man who blamed her for everything he couldn't control. And yet, she stayed. That was the part that hurt the most. Not that she was suffering, but that she thought she deserved to. And I watched. From my apartment high above the city, from reports, emails, shadows in windows. I watched the girl I raised become a woman I barely recognized, and I did nothing. Not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much. Because the ache of betrayal had hollowed me out so completely that I didn't know how to reach for her anymore. And so I waited, wondering if the next knock on my door would be hers, or a scream from the street below. And through it all, I kept telling myself, this is what consequences look like. But the truth? It looked an awful lot like grief. The knock came at dusk, soft, hesitant, like it didn't want to be heard. I was sitting at the kitchen table, fingers curled around a lukewarm cup of tea I hadn't touched in over an hour, staring at nothing and thinking about everything. When I opened the door, I froze. Rachel stood on the threshold, soaked from the rain, her coat clinging to her like second skin, a plastic grocery bag crumpled in her trembling hands. She looked destroyed. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lips cracked, her hair damp and tangled. My breath caught in my throat, not out of joy or relief, but because she looked like a stranger wearing my daughter's face. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. No rehearsed speech, no excuses, just silence. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, dripping onto the hardwood floor like some fragile thing that had barely survived a storm. I handed her a towel, neither of us speaking. I made tea because it was something to do with my hands. We sat across from each other at the small table, like two ghosts trapped in the same memory. She stared into her cup for what felt like an eternity before finally whispering, "He's not who I thought he was." Her voice was brittle, full of gravel and exhaustion. I didn't respond. She didn't expect me to. "He checks my phone, my emails. He followed me to work last week." A pause. Then she looked up, her eyes wide and terrified. "He thinks I'm hiding something, that you're hiding something. He said you were trying to ruin us." My chest tightened with panic. Had he figured it out? Had he finally pieced together the ownership, the connection, the truth I had tried so hard to shield? But she kept speaking, and her voice cracked with every word. "I told him I hadn't seen you, that I didn't even know where you were. That was a lie." Her eyes flicked to mine. "I found the security notice, the one with your LLC's name." I recognized it. LMT, Lenora May Thomas. Her voice broke. "I knew it was you." I swallowed hard. I should have been angry. Furious that she had found me like this. That she had lied to him, but not to me. That she had waited until her world crumbled before crawling back. But all I felt was a dull ache spreading through my ribs like rot. "Why now?" I asked. She didn't answer right away. Just stared at her tea, watching the steam fade into the air like hope. "Because I miss you," she whispered. "But I don't know how to be around you anymore." I felt that like a knife. "You left." I said quietly. You let him push me out. She flinched. No, I added. You didn't let him. You stood beside him. Her mouth parted slightly like she wanted to deny it, to plead ignorance, but there was nothing left to say. We sat in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that feels heavier than words. I didn't think it would get this bad, she murmured. I thought I could manage it, that if I just kept the peace. She shook her head. But you can't manage a man like Travis. You either survive him, or you leave. I've left, she said suddenly. The words dropped like a bomb between us. He tried to go through my purse again. I told him no. He screamed, packed a bag, left. I changed the locks. I didn't say anything. I didn't know how. Because I had waited for this moment, dreamed of it, and now that it was here, all I could feel was a thick, endless sorrow. She looked at me with wet eyes. I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to feel safe for a little while. When she finally stood to leave, she reached for my hand. I didn't move. Then, slowly, I let her take it. It was the first time in years we had touched without tension. She gave it a squeeze. I'm sorry, she whispered, for everything. I didn't say it back. I couldn't, but I held her hand longer than she expected. When she left, the door clicked shut with the soft finality of a chapter turning. I sat there long after she was gone, holding the warmth of her teacup like it might keep me from breaking in half. She had come back, but what she left behind was everything I hadn't dared feel until now. The email from the property manager was routine, but I knew what I was doing when I approved the line. Owner will be present for tenant Q&A at the end of the meeting. I told myself it wasn't about revenge. I told myself it was closure. But deep inside, beneath the rehearsed calm and layers of muted grief, a storm had been brewing for months. I arrived early that day, dressed in dark jeans and a charcoal blazer, my hair smoothed into soft waves that Rachel wouldn't recognize, Travis would never expect. I sat near the back of the common room as the other tenants filed in, some bored, some curious. Then he walked in. Travis, loud, confident, irritated as always. Rachel trailed behind him like a shadow that had forgotten how to stand upright. They didn't notice me. He made a beeline for the front, chest puffed with entitlement. Where is she? He snapped at the manager. This owner who thinks she can raise our rent like we're her personal ATM. His voice was too loud for the small room. A few tenants shifted uncomfortably. The manager stayed composed. All questions will be addressed during the presentation. Travis scoffed, muttering under his breath. Rachel looked down at her shoes. I felt a strange cocktail of emotions surge inside me. Disgust, sadness, rage, and something heavier. Something that felt a lot like mourning. Not for him, for her, for us. For who we used to be before everything cracked wide open. The meeting started with updates, new locks, cleaner common areas, structural reinforcements. All improvements funded, in part, by the very rent that Travis had called extortion. I watched his face twist with impatience. He didn't care about building improvements. He wanted a villain, someone to blame. And I was about to give him one. The manager paused and said, We'd like to thank LMT Holdings for their contributions. The owner is here today if anyone has questions. I stood. The silence was instant. I walked to the front slowly, deliberately. I could feel every eye on me. But I only looked at two faces. Travis's confusion shifted rapidly to disbelief, then fury. Rachel's mouth fell open, eyes wide, full of something that looked like horror. And maybe recognition. Good evening, I said, my voice steady despite the war inside me. My name is Lenora. I'm the owner of this building. Travis shot up so fast his chair screeched backward. You! He spat. This is some sick joke. His voice cracked on the last word. You raised our rent? You've been behind this the whole time? I met his gaze, leveled and calm. I gave you a roof, I said. I made improvements. I treated every tenant fairly. What I didn't do was forget. He started forward, but Rachel stepped between us. Travis, stop, she said. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried more weight than I'd ever heard from her. What did you just say to me? He snapped, stunned. I said stop, she repeated, louder this time. She's not your enemy. You are. The words hit him like a slap. The grief hit me just as hard. Because for a moment, I saw a glimpse of the girl I raised, the one who used to believe in fairness and right and wrong before she let fear become her compass. She turned to me. I didn't know, she whispered. About the building, the money, any of it. I nodded. I know. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. I wanted to say because you wouldn't have listened. I wanted to say because you left me in the rain and never looked back. But all I said was, because hearing it wouldn't have been enough. You had to see it. Travis backed away, seething, teeth clenched. You two deserve each other, he hissed. No, I said softly. She deserves better. Then I turned and walked away, the sound of my heels against the tile echoing louder than his rage ever could. And for the first time since the night I was thrown out, I didn't feel powerless. I felt whole. Not because I had won, but because I no longer needed to. I had already become someone he could never control again, and that was enough. After the meeting, I didn't celebrate. There was no wine, no music, no laughter echoing through empty rooms. I sat alone in my apartment, lights dimmed, a single cup of tea growing cold in my hands. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was swollen with everything I hadn't said, everything I'd held back to keep my dignity intact. Travis was gone, left Rachel without so much as a conversation, just a note scrawled in that furious, bitter handwriting of his. You ruined everything. No name, no accountability, just cowardice. He packed up in the middle of the night and disappeared like a stain that finally realized it couldn't scrub the damage it caused. But even in his absence, I couldn't breathe easy. The wreckage he left behind still clung to Rachel's face, to the weight in her shoulders, to the shudder in her voice when she called me just to say, he's gone. I didn't know what to say back. Part of me wanted to scream at her for letting it go on so long, for standing there that night and letting him throw me out. Another part of me wanted to reach through the phone and hold her the way I did when she was 5, when she scraped her knee and sobbed like the world had ended. But I was tired. Tired of carrying the weight for both of us. Tired of waiting for love that came only when everything else had been taken away. She started over slowly, found a tiny studio apartment across town, got a job she could walk to, sold off furniture piece by piece to stay afloat. She told me in a voicemail she'd started therapy, that she'd joined a community art class, that she was trying to rebuild. I listened to that message 5 times, and every time I felt the same dull ache in my chest, because I was proud, and I was angry, and I was still grieving the daughter I'd lost to silence long before Travis ever entered her life. When I finally sold the building, quietly, through Mr. Ellison, I didn't feel triumph. I felt the bitter end of a long, necessary war. The paperwork came in a plain envelope. The numbers were staggering. More than I ever thought I'd see in my lifetime. But none of it could buy back the nights I cried alone in that motel, or the way I still flinched when I thought about Rachel's blank stare the night I left. I donated half the profit to a shelter for women and children in crisis. The kind of place I wish I'd known existed when I stood outside Rachel's apartment with nowhere to go. I asked them to name a wing after my mother. The Marianne House. It felt right. Quiet. Powerful. A tribute to the woman who loved me from the shadows. The rest of the money went into a down payment on a little 2-bedroom house nestled on a tree-lined street in Cedar Park, the same town I once left behind. The front porch had a swing. The garden was overgrown, but the soil was good. The first time I walked through the door, the air smelled like sun-warmed wood and the faintest trace of lavender. I cried in the hallway. Not because I was happy, but because it was the first time I wasn't afraid. The first time in years I didn't feel like I was trespassing in someone else's life. Rachel helped me move in. We didn't talk much, but when she carried in a box labeled Kitchen Moms, she paused and smiled softly, like she'd just realized what that word meant again. After we unpacked, we sat on the porch swing, watching the wind move through the oak trees. "I used to ride my bike down this street," she whispered, "before everything got complicated." I nodded. "You were always safe here," I said. Her voice cracked. I forgot how that felt. And so did I. I don't know what I expected the end to feel like. Maybe peace, maybe redemption, maybe something close to forgiveness. But as I stood at the window of my new home, mug of cooling tea in hand, and stared at the soft glow of the streetlight outside, all I felt was a silence that no longer protected me, only echoed. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I once begged for when grief and rage roared through me like a wildfire. But now that I had it, it didn't soothe me. It suffocated. Because even after everything, after Travis vanished into whatever hole he crawled back into, after Rachel chose to reclaim her life, after the building was sold and the past turned into legal documents and memory, I still carried the weight of every moment I'd been erased. And no amount of paperwork or property deeds could give me back the part of me that died on the night I stood in the cold outside my daughter's apartment, waiting for a door that never opened. The final letter from Mr. Ellison came on a Thursday. He congratulated me on the full transfer, confirmed that the lawsuit against Travis had settled, and reminded me that I was now free. Free to sell, invest, walk away, rebuild. I read it 3 times before folding it neatly and placing it in a drawer I no longer opened. Not because it didn't matter, but because it mattered too much. It was over. I had won. But the cost? That was a receipt I still hadn't dared look at in full, because it wasn't just money I had paid, it was years. It was love. It was the version of me that used to believe in unconditional anything. That night, I opened my mother's diary one final time. The leather was cracked now, soft with use. I had read it cover to cover so many times that I could quote whole passages in my sleep. But on this night, I wrote something new. A note I folded gently and tucked between the pages, right under the entry that had once changed everything. It read, "You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth and the strength to never forget who you are, even when they try to make you disappear." It wasn't for me. It was for Rachel, for the day she might need it, for the day she's drowning again and wonders who she was before he turned her into a ghost. The last message I got from Travis came through a blocked number, just a voicemail. Static, breathing, a few unintelligible words. Then silence. I didn't respond. I sent it straight to my lawyer. My fear didn't leave me, not entirely. Every time a car slowed in front of the house, every creak of the floorboards at night, I still flinched, still imagined the worst. That's the thing no one tells you about trauma. Even after you survive, it keeps whispering, keeps circling, like smoke that never fully clears. And yet, I didn't crumble. I didn't run. I stayed. Because this house, this silence, this life, I built it from the ashes of what they tried to burn. Rachel visited once a week now, sometimes with groceries, sometimes just to sit. She brought a small painting once, an abstract piece in dark reds and golds. "It's a phoenix," she said quietly, "for you." I hung it above the mantel and stared at it for hours that night, not because I saw myself in it, but because I wanted to. Later, as I sat on the porch swing, wind curling around my ankles, I whispered something I hadn't dared say in years. I forgive you. Not to Rachel, not even to Travis, but to myself. For staying too long, for not fighting back sooner, for loving people who let me fall, and for finally walking away. Because in the end, they didn't break me. They revealed me, and I was never the fire they tried to extinguish. I was the match they should have never struck. This story is a powerful reminder that the deepest betrayals often come not from strangers, but from the people we once held closest. Those we raised, trusted, and gave our lives to. It teaches us that silence in the face of cruelty is not kindness. It is complicity. And yet, even after unimaginable rejection, the journey of self-worth is not over. We are never too old to reclaim our dignity. For older adults, especially those who have spent lifetimes sacrificing for others, this story speaks to the quiet strength of starting again, not with noise or vengeance, but with grace, resilience, and clarity. It tells us that power does not always come from control or confrontation. Sometimes, it's found in simply refusing to be erased. It reminds us that healing can be lonely, slow, and painful, but it is never out of reach. And most importantly, it shows that forgiveness is not something we owe others. It's a gift we give ourselves, not to forget what happened, but to remember who we are. No matter how late in life we rediscover our voice, it still matters. Because the truth, once found, is a foundation no one can take from us.